Ever scrolled through those real estate listings, you know the ones, and thought, ah, what could possibly go wrong here?
Right.
Well, today's deep dive is going to add a dose of reality to those house hunting daydreams.
Yeah.
We're tackling this New Zealand court case, Watson v. Zhou and Zhang, and
Oh, I've heard about this one.
yeah, it throws a wrench in the whole dream home fantasy.
It really makes you think twice about that phrase, getting what you paid for, especially when it comes to real estate.
You got that right. So we went straight to the source for this one.
Okay.
Our sources are excerpts from the official court judgment.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to unpack all the legal arguments.
Oh, this is going to be good.
And trust me, this isn't your average property dispute.
No, this case has it all. Unexpected leaps, questionable renovations. Enough legal twists and turns to make your head spin.
Let's start with the basics, though.
Okay.
We've got Mrs. Watson. She's an elderly lady, lived in the house for decades.
Okay.
On the other side, we have Mr. Zhu and Mrs. Zhang.
Okay.
They were new to New Zealand, excited to start fresh in their first home.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you can imagine their excitement quickly turned sour. Just a week after moving in, they discovered some serious leaks.
Oh, no. Not just a couple drips, right?
No, we're not talking about a few drips here and there. The judgment describes water pouring in.
Oh, my goodness. A homeowner's worst nightmare.
The worst.
Yeah.
So naturally, they took Mrs. Watson to court, claimed she hid the leaks,
Yeah.
misled them about the whole thing.
Right.
But here's where things get a little interesting. The court didn't actually find any evidence of an outright lie.
Really?
Yeah, the court dug deep into witness testimonies, text messages between the buyers and the real estate agent. You name it, they looked at it.
Wow.
And they concluded there wasn't enough to prove Mrs. Watson intentionally deceived them about those specific leaks.
So no smoking gun.
No smoking gun.
Then how did the buyers win?
That's where things get a little legally complex.
Okay.
You see, the buyers argued something called common mistake.
Common mistake.
Essentially, it means both parties were mistaken about a really fundamental aspect of the agreement.
Okay.
So in this case, they claimed that both they and Mrs. Watson mistakenly believed that the house was free of any major issues.
So it's like they were both in the dark.
Yeah.
But isn't there that whole buyer beware principle?
You're exactly right to bring that up. That's where the whole caveat emptor thing comes in. It essentially means the buyer is responsible for doing their due diligence,
Right.
uncovering potential problems before they commit to that purchase.
Makes sense, because buying a house is a huge decision.
It's huge. You don't want to be stuck with a money pit.
Exactly. And this case really shows how crucial it is for buyers to really investigate a property thoroughly.
Yeah.
And I mean, going beyond just looking at the house yourself, getting a professional building inspection is really important
Oh, yeah.
because they can often spot those red flags that the average person might miss.
They know what to look for.
Exactly.
And in this case, the buyers did bring in a builder to look at the house.
Okay.
So how did that play into the court's decision?
Well, the court acknowledged the inspection, but they also pointed out that the leaks weren't the only issue here.
Okay.
There was another element that ended up being central to the buyer's victory,
Okay.
and it had to do with some work Mrs. Watson had done on her deck.
Okay. The deck.
Mm-hmm.
How does a deck renovation factor into a case about a leaky house?
Right. At first glance, it seems completely unrelated.
Yeah.
But bear with me, because this is where the case takes a fascinating turn.
Okay, you've got me hooked.
Mm-hmm.
We're going from leaky ceilings to deck renovations. I love these deep dives. You never know where you're going to end up.
It's a classic example of how even the smallest details can have huge legal implications.
Yeah.
Remember how I mentioned common mistake earlier?
Yeah.
Well, the court clarified that it's not enough to just say, oh, we both thought the house was fine. You have to prove there was a specific mistake about a specific thing with the property.
Okay, so it's not enough for the buyers to just be like, we thought the house was generally good.
Yeah.
They needed something more concrete.
Exactly. And in this case, that something more turned out to be the deck.
Okay.
It all came down to building permits.
Or a lack thereof.
Or a lack thereof, right. You see, Mrs. Watson had some work done on the deck to improve the drainage around the house.
Okay.
But it seems like she didn't get the proper permits for those renovations.
Ah, okay, so we're connecting back to the leaks here.
Yes.
So were the renovations meant to fix the leaks and maybe they were done poorly or something?
Well, we don't know for sure if those specific renovations were meant to address those exact leaks that the buyers experienced. But the court did find that the drainage work on that deck likely would have required a building permit.
Okay.
And because Mrs. Watson didn't get one, she was technically in breach of a warranty that was included in the standard real estate agreement.
Hold on. Okay, so just to be sure I'm following this correctly.
Yeah.
Even though the leaks themselves couldn't be directly linked to the deck work, the fact that the work was done without a permit, that was enough to swing the case in the buyer's favor.
That's the thing, right? You see, the contract included a warranty that any work done on the property met building code regulations.
Right.
And this is actually standard in many real estate agreements.
Okay.
So even though that warranty didn't specifically say no leaky houses allowed, the fact that the deck work wasn't up to code, that was a breach.
Wow. So this seemingly small detail about a deck permit opened up this whole other legal avenue for the buyers.
Yes, and it really highlights how important those building codes and regulations are. They're not just these bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through. They're there to protect both buyers and sellers.
Man, this is making me sweat a little bit. And I'm just renting. Imagine being Mrs. Watson, thinking you're selling your house in good faith, only to get tripped up on a missing permit.
It just goes to show the importance of transparency for sellers.
Yeah.
Right. Like disclosing any work that's been done, even if it seems minor, can help prevent these kinds of situations.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on those home improvement shows. Permits, people, permits. But what about the buyers? Did they end up getting a brand new house out of this?
Well, not exactly. While the court did rule in their favor, the question of damages, essentially how much they're owed for this whole leaky ordeal, that was sent back to a lower court to figure out.
Wait, what? After all this legal back and forth,
Yeah.
they still don't know how much compensation they're going to get.
Right. They were awarded damages for the retaining wall. But that exact amount for those leaks is still up in the air.
Okay.
The court acknowledged that there was a breach of warranty with that drainage work, but they needed more information to determine what appropriate compensation would be.
So there's still a little bit of a cliffhanger to this whole story. What happens next? Do the buyers and Mrs. Watson have to go back to court and just duke it out over like repair costs and all that?
Well, they could, but the judges seem to be hoping it wouldn't come to that. They actually encouraged both sides to try and just reach an agreement outside of court.
Okay. Maybe through mediation or by working with their own experts to just agree on a fair number everyone could agree on.
Okay, so a more amicable approach.
Right.
It just makes you wonder if going through that whole court process all over again would be way more costly and time-consuming than finding some common ground.
Exactly. And that's often the case with these legal disputes. Sometimes that negotiated settlement can be the most practical solution for everyone involved.
This whole case has been a roller coaster ride. We went from leaky ceilings to deck permits to the nuances of common mistake and caveat emptor.
And we've really seen how a case about one leaky house in New Zealand can actually tell us so much about real estate transactions everywhere.
So what does this all mean for those of us who, aren't in the middle of, like, a huge legal battle over a leaky house? Right. That's the million-dollar question. And it's definitely something we should all be thinking about. Doesn't matter if you're a homeowner or just starting to think about getting into the market.
I'm not going to lie, this case has made me rethink how I'd approach house hunting in the future.
It really changes how you think about that what you see is what you get idea.
Yeah.
Like there's so much more to a property than you can see on the surface.
Right.
And sometimes those little details can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I always knew getting a building inspection was important, but I'd probably be focused